Hello, this is Jim Benson from Personal Kanban and Modus Cooperandi, welcoming you to the third episode of Collaberwocky, where we have conversations about collaboration. Today our guests are Jabe Bloom and Corey Ladas. Jabe is the CTO of the Library Corporation, and Corey is the author of Scrumban and a pioneer in software systems development. And our conversation today is speaking from power in a uncertain world. And let's get right to it, shall we?
All right, then we're going to go with Jabe's because we haven't had a topic from Jabe yet.
Hope this isn't the same talk over again, but we'll try.
Well, if it is, it'll be short.
I actually think it'll be a nice segue because, optionality is kind of the underlying idea here. Well, it's right in the title.
There you go. Okay, so the title of this is Speaking from Power in an Uncertain World, and it was Jabe's topic. So, Jabe, introduce their topic.
So, the topic is really about there's a huge amount of work in the agile community and in the lean community to help teams talk to power. It's a major part of our culture is to teach people how to talk to power, confront management, things like that. But really, there's not as much work around this idea of how do you speak from power. So as a C-level executive, I ask a lot of agilists questions like, how do I talk to teams without overpowering them? And it's a really, for somebody who wants to be effective as a lean person, as an agile person, who also happens to be in a leadership role, a management role, how do you speak from that position to teams without destroying their independence and their ability to self-organize, etc. And especially, how do you do that in a world where we're seeing where uncertainty is becoming more and more prevalent, and also where uncertainty is being used for competitive advantage. So more and more people are using the edge of uncertainty to kind of get a competitive advantage. If I don't know the answer, if I am uncertain of what the answer is, how do I speak from power about what I would like you to do or how I'd like you to do it without losing the team's confidence, if that makes sense?
Okay.
The first thing I think of when you bring that up, when you describe it, is that that's so much of the ground that Deming covered. Right? I mean, talking about driving fear from the workplace and talking about the importance of leadership, right? I mean, what is leadership more than sort of making decisions and providing direction people in the face of uncertainty? So, I mean, I would think that you could really get quite a lot of mileage out of the Deming thing around that subject.
Yeah, I mean, I love Deming. I like ACOF a lot as well. It's been really useful for me to start thinking about a lot of those ideas. There's a lot of people who are talking about systems thinking versus complexity thinking right now, and I really think that ACOF is a great bridge between the two. He has a lot of talk about not just systems, but social systems, and I think he kind of gives systems thinking a twist of Deming that is really useful for me to think about how to do that. So I definitely think that the literature has a lot to do with that. I'm always amazed, when I read ACOF and Deming, right? Like these guys were writing when I was born, and we haven't, like, the ideas have been out there for so long. Why haven't they helped more? That's part of the frustrating part for me, I guess.
One of the things that frustrates me is talking about when we're so. You mentioned earlier about the comparisons issues where we can't help but compare things. If we give two things, we just can't help but see how they're similar or how they're different. And one of the things that happens with that is we tend to overuse the word versus. And so with people who are saying, I want to talk about complexity theory versus systems theory, talking about complexity theory versus systems theory is like, I want to talk about the universe versus solar systems. There are systems within a complex environment. Otherwise, the damn thing wouldn't be complex in the first place. It's the intersection of a whole lot of systems. And so understanding the rule set in these, somewhat autonomous systems and seeing, how they overlap, how they work together and so forth is really vital. And saying that there's only one system in one location is like saying, well, I'm made up of social and not atoms. So that frustrates me.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's vulnerability to model error, right? Like people get overly attached to their models, and then which always ends up leading them astray.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so I have this theory about models which is that it takes a lot of time to build a good model, and the part of the problem with it is that when we build them, we're like, this must be valuable because I spent a lot of time making it. So I'm going to try to use it as many places as I can possibly make it fit because it costs a lot to make this damn thing, so I better use it. It's a total efficiency versus effectiveness problem, and it's one of the real problems with models, I think. Is they get overused and they get used in the wrong places, and the initial cost gets evaluated into whether it's good or not, which is not a good way of measuring goodness, I think.
Yeah. Well, there's two elements with that. The first is that we assume that good models will live forever, that they're not in some way based on what's happening right here and right now.
Yep.
So the Agile Manifesto and Agile methodologies were reacting to a very different social structure than we see dealing with software development companies at this time. Now, does that mean that there aren't places that are as bad or as worse as they were in the 80s? Well, sure there are, but by and large, the movement, the evolution of software development techniques has superseded those ideas. But that doesn't mean that those ideas have no place in the world, because obviously there are still places where they work quite well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think one of my favorite ideas or quotes about this, what you were just talking about, is Gibson's "the future's already here; it's just not well distributed." Mm-hmm. Like, yes, Agile was once a small group of people, and now it's a bigger group of people. As it's diffused, probably some of the impact is diffused. But that doesn't mean that people aren't now also beyond Agile. They're just the smaller vanguard in front of that other group, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's people who are living in the future. There's probably people living in multiple futures. It's which one's the best one is unclear to me. But I think that, the idea that that we have found the best way of building software and we will never find a better way is actually really depressing.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it's just yet another iteration of the best practice fallacy, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The best practice is to not have practices or something. I have yeah.
The best practice is to have a practice with a sunset date.
Right, or we were talking about
that companies shouldn't live forever. Your practices certainly shouldn't live forever, and actually, no rule or law should live forever. You should always go back and say, "Is this still relevant? Is this still helping?" And one of the things that we were trying to get radical about, or have been trying to get radical about using Kanban, is we want to do that every day. Is this still helping? Is this still helping? No, really, is this still helping?
Yeah. One of the things that I've so I like running, and I ran a marathon for the first time this year, and which was just to be clear, it took me 5.5 hours, and you get disqualified at 6. So I'm not a fast runner. I'm just I can kind of run for a long distance. But my father was an orthopedist, and so one of the interesting things about running is that the first part of the training process is literally just to basically, beat your bones into strength, right? Because your bones have a reaction to being hit by the ground, and they actually get stronger, which is kind of cool. So like you run and you get stronger, and if you tried to run a marathon without doing the training first, you'd probably break your legs, literally fracture your legs. So you need to build up. Well, but the craziest part about it is that, in fact, when you stop running, your body has a system that goes and tears the bone down again, right? So your body's constantly trying to reach a level of equilibrium in your skeletal system where it's trying to optimize how much weight you're actually carrying versus how much structure the bone has, right? So it's constantly adding and removing structure, right, to keep this balance. And it's something that we don't do very well at all as teams. And as groups, we tend to start, layering things instead of trying to figure out how to keep them all in balance.
I like that because, I think part of the way forward is starting to think about, human organizations in more biological metaphors and less mechanical metaphors. I think that kind of gets at what...
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biological metaphors are really important, especially if we can avoid some of the complexity theory around biological systems, like ants and bees and flocks of birds and emergent behavior that's kind of like completely statistical and crap like that. It drives me crazy when we talk about emergent behavior in a system of 5 or 6 people. Yes, they can create emergent behavior, but really, it's not like a flock of birds emergent behavior.
Right.
But maybe if we had an entire stadium full of programmers, they'd write something pretty awesome, just kind of accidentally.
Exactly. It's one of my biggest frustrations. It's one of with teams is there's two awful coaching processes that really drive me crazy. The first is the Scrum "you must have pain before you can learn" concept, right? Which is like, the way that you'll learn is we'll apply this process that will cause you excruciating pain, and then you'll learn that hurts. And you won't want to do that anymore.
It's so Nietzschean, right?
It just doesn't make any sense to me, right? So, again, this is something that I see a lot of coaches get really upset at me when I say it. I honestly believe, no, you do not. If you were a football coach and you were caught intentionally causing pain to players, you get fired. That doesn't make any sense. As a coach, the idea is you have players who you encourage them to play as hard as they can, and then they come to you and they say things like, "I think I pulled my hamstring. It hurts." And you give them specific exercises to make their hamstring feel better, right? I think that what happens a lot in Scrum and XP, people do this at the same time, which is you apply all the practices at once. And what I think you get from that is learned helplessness, right? So it's like, do all of these things. And you're like, I don't know why I'm doing them. And you're like, doesn't matter, just do them. And the result is that you're getting stimulated to do something, but you don't see the result because you don't know why the hell you're doing it in the first place. Right. So they're disassociated, and eventually you're just like, fuck it, I don't care.
So is that part of the... there's been a lot of talk about how people want to be like the Mr. Miyagi of process coaches, but Mr. Miyagi really never told the kid anything. He just basically said, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then at the end the kid was enlightened. Yeah.
But I think, again, Mr. Miyagi's competitor, the other guy who was teaching karate, taught karate by hitting people in the face and saying, "That hurt, didn't it? You better learn to block." Really?
It's like, yeah. It's success by attrition, right? So,
That's right. After a while,
survivorship bias, right? The students that live through the process are...
Yeah, it's
the
really
strongest.
frustrating to me. And it's really frustrating to me because, again, getting back to the topic of speaking for power and stuff like that, so I'm going to go to this team and say, you should trust me and you should believe me and we should get along and stuff like that. But if you don't get done what you promised me to get done 2 weeks ago today, you fail. And we're going to have words about that and have, an hour-long retrospective about how you screwed up. And I understand not everybody does this, and that's not always true, but there's certainly way too much literature about it out there right now that really argues that that's exactly what you should do, and that's awful. It's just
there's so many things that bother me about Scrum, but that kind of like motivation through peer humiliation aspect is by far the worst. It's just it's anti-humanist and it's and a lot of people are quite hypocritical about those things. Like they claim that some of those agile ideals are about people and about humanistic values, but then they turn around and do idiotic shit like what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really about people; it's about tribes.
Yeah, and it's about the developer tribe too, and it's about being the right kind of developer as well.
Yeah, right.
I have guys who out here. We're doing a brainstorming session, and I have this developer who's great. He's amazing, and I sent him a note, and I said, I really like you to come to this collaboration meeting that we're having. We're going to talk about a future product, and I think you'd be great. And I really like talking to you about things. And he's actually awesome one-on-one. He's great one-on-one. But he wrote me back and he said, I got the company-wide invite, and I didn't respond on purpose, and I had to think about it for a little while because, you've invited me specifically, but I want you to understand the worst days of my life were going to Scrum meetings and having to talk to a group of people. I hated it. I hated every moment of it. And I was like, whoa, that's... And it's that I'm not that person, right? I like sitting in rooms and talking to people, but it took a lot of energy and a lot of time for him to think through that. Where he wrote back to his boss, thank God, he got around that part of his head and said, no, I'm not going to come to that meeting because I hate doing that. It's awful.
Right.
Go ahead.
That was a big part of what I was thinking about with the sort of intentional cooperation idea, right? That you have to design rules of cooperation that make sense for the people that are actually participating, right? So you take a team full of brilliant but autistic introverts and try to get them to participate in a very intensely social process like Scrum, you're probably not going to get the result that you were hoping for. And the idea of blaming the people for doing it wrong is just asinine. So you've got to be able to design cooperative systems that account for personalities.
Yep.
And I think Agile does a bad job of that. I think Agile sort of has a stereotype about developers that it organizes around, and I think is quite mistaken.
Yeah.
So Jabe, in the topic, so when your initial speaking of power was to send out a large invite and say, everybody come to this, then your second attempt at speaking from power was to write directly and say, no, really, really, I want you to come to this. So here's somebody writing back who is quite self-aware, knows what their limits are, knows what their strengths are, but that email was probably incredibly difficult for him to write, and we all know that there's a lot of other people around who just wouldn't have bothered to write. They just show up and try and participate as minimally as they could and then get away. In the end, not really adding value and perhaps even taking away from the value by making other people who would have stayed longer and had a better conversation want to leave more quickly.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, given what your role is?
So I think, there's a couple things that I think happened in particular. I can't be inside his head, but I know that his behavior, his observable behavior, has radically changed in 4 years. When we first got here, we used to have meetings where I would stand in front of a whole room and I would say, talk, and then I'd stand there and I'd say, nobody can leave until somebody asks me a question, and we would stand there for significant periods of time. It was very hard to get people to talk. The behavior has changed radically. I think one of the ways that it's changed, and one of the reasons that I went to a one-on-one approach versus kind of a mass mailing approach, was that this guy really blossomed with another person when we started pairing them together. They were both these kind of really introverted people, and we paired them together, and they learned to talk to each other one-on-one. And then as long as you kind of introduce them into situations where there's more of them than there are of the others. So in other words, basically, you can have one person go talk to the pair at a time. So like a product owner can go talk to them and stuff like that. They're great. They support each other. There's this also, I think, a risk-taking that is supported by pairing that's different than team behavior, in that they both kind of own the ideas jointly, so they don't feel kind of personally responsible for any one idea, which allows them to take different sort of risks. I don't know. I think it's really hard. I think it's really difficult to figure out how to ask people to do things, and at the same time say, listen, there's certain things that I'm telling you, and you need to do them because it's policy, or this is governance, or you can't drive 50 miles an hour around the parking lot. Like, certain things that we do are governance things. And then there's certain things that we do that are just our attempts at leadership, right? I don't know. One of the frustrating things for me about some of the self-organization concepts around agile stuff is that do we have a general belief that we can become more knowledgeable as we kind of experience the world? If we do, I've been doing this for a longer time than you have, so maybe I can teach you something, or at least help you not go down a blind alley, or something like that. So how do we, that's frustrating to me as well, is trying to figure out when that's part of the speaking from power thing. In theory, I'm the CTO because someone believes that I should be, and there's a reason for that in theory. Mm-hmm. You may not agree with it. You may think I'm an idiot, but we can talk about that. But if that's true, then there's certain things that we need to be able to discuss. And so again, part of it for me is like trying to figure out the appropriate way to motivate people at the appropriate time, trying to figure out listening carefully to what they're doing and what problems they're actually having, and not just being like broad brush, like here's the one size fits all answer to every development problem. Just do it like this, and I'm going back to my office. I guess I don't know.
Call me when it's done.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else, or shall we move on to the last topic?
So that's it for episode 3. Tune in next time when Corey and Jabe and I discuss failure is an option. So we'll see you then. Bye.